News of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. On 1,000 worlds, slaves who had worked for centuries suddenly stopped working. Species that had paid tribute for generations declared their independence. The carefully maintained order of 3,000 years began to crumble in a matter of days. On the Council homeworld, Overlord Vexthari received report after report of rebellion and chaos. His throne room, once a symbol of absolute power, now felt like a prison. Counselor Mordak scuttled back and forth on his many legs, reading from datapads with increasingly desperate news. The Andromedan Collective has stopped all tribute shipments, Mordak reported. The Crystal Singers have declared themselves a free republic. The hive worlds are no longer responding to our communications at all. Vexthari's claws scraped against the stone arms of his throne. How many species are still loyal? Less than half, Overlord. And the number drops every hour. What about our fleet? Mordak's voice became even more worried. Admiral Zek Morris lost over 3,000 ships. The survivors are requesting permission to return home immediately. Many ship captains are refusing to fight against the rebellion. For the first time in 800 years of rule, Vexthari felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of death, but fear of irrelevance. The galaxy he had controlled was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The final blow came when Counselor Yildesta entered the throne room with a group of other high-ranking officials. Their faces were grim with determination. Overlord, Yildesta said formally, by unanimous vote of the remaining council members, you are removed from power. The tribute system is officially ended. We are prepared to negotiate with the rebellion for a peaceful transition of government. Vexthari rose from his throne, towering over the smaller beings. You dare challenge me? I'm the rightful ruler of this galaxy. You are the ruler of a system that no longer exists, Yildesta replied calmly. The galaxy has chosen freedom over fear. We must adapt or be destroyed. Within hours, former Overlord Vexthari was in exile, and Counselor Yildesta had sent a message to Earth requesting peace negotiations. President Hyjin Park received the message while standing in the rebuilt Sol spaceport. Around her, construction crews worked to repair the damage from the brief but intense fighting that had reached Earth's surface. The war had lasted only 18 months, but it had changed everything. They want to surrender? She asked Admiral Kang, who stood beside her reading the alien transmission. More than surrender, Kang replied. They want to completely restructure galactic government. No more tribute system, no more forced labor. They're proposing a democratic federation where each species has an equal vote. President Park smiled for the first time in months. And what do our allies think? The allies were the dozens of species that had joined humanity's rebellion. They now controlled over half the galaxy and were growing stronger every day. Their representatives had been meeting on Earth to discuss the future of galactic civilization. The Kepler Collective supports full democracy, reported Foreign Minister Zhou, who had been coordinating with the allied species. The new Centauri Republic wants guarantees that their independence will be respected. The Vegan Trade Federation is interested in establishing free trade agreements. And the others? They all want the same thing we do. Freedom to govern themselves without interference from distant overlords. 3 months later, the largest gathering in galactic history took place at Nexus Prime. The space station had been expanded to accommodate representatives from over 800 species. The old council chambers, with their hierarchy of rings and towering throne, had been demolished. In their place was a circular assembly hall where every species sat as equals. President Park led the Earth delegation, which included Admiral Kang, Captain Kim, and diplomat Dong Hyun Lim. As they entered the Great Hall, they were greeted by beings from across the galaxy. Some were species humanity had never seen before. Others were former enemies who now stood as friends and allies. The negotiations took weeks. Every species had different needs, different concerns, different ideas about how the new government should work. Some wanted complete independence. Others preferred a loose confederation. A few were nervous about giving up the security that the old system had provided. Diplomat Lim worked tirelessly to find compromises that everyone could accept. He had spent his career studying alien cultures and understood how to communicate with dozens of different species. His patience and skill were crucial in keeping the negotiations moving forward. The key, he explained to President Park during a break between sessions, is to remember that they're as afraid of us as we are of them. Many species have never governed themselves before. They need reassurance that freedom doesn't mean Chaos. The breakthrough came when Dr. Min-ho Park proposed sharing humanity's kinetic weapon technology with any species that agreed to the new democratic principles. This offer convinced many wavering civilizations that humans were serious about equality and cooperation. "We're not trying to replace the council with human rule," Dr. Park explained to the assembly. "We're trying to create something that has never existed before. A galaxy where might does not make right, where the strong protect the weak instead of enslaving them." The final vote was close, but the Terran Accords were approved by a margin of 63%. The new Galactic Federation would be governed by an elected council with representatives from every member species. There would be no tribute system, no forced labor, and no hereditary rulers. Most importantly, any species could leave the Federation at any time if they chose to. Freedom was voluntary, not imposed. 1 year later, Admiral Dae-ho Kim stood at the podium in the new Federation Assembly Hall. He had been promoted after the war and now served as Earth's chief military representative. Around him sat delegates from nearly 1,000 worlds, all of them free citizens of the galaxy's first true democracy. "Today marks the second anniversary of humanity's refusal to pay tribute," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's advanced translation systems. 2 years ago, when I stood before the old council and said one simple word, I had no idea what would follow." He paused and looked out at the assembled delegates. Among them were former slaves who now governed their own worlds. Former tribute collectors who had learned to live as equals rather than masters. Former enemies who had become trusted allies. That word was no, Kim continued. No to oppression. No to slavery. No to the idea that some beings are born to rule while others are born to serve. It was the shortest speech in galactic history, but perhaps the most important. The assembly hall erupted in applause from hundreds of different species, each showing approval in their own way. Some clapped their hands or tentacles. Others made clicking sounds or flashed different colors. The cacophony was beautiful in its diversity. Today, children across the galaxy learn about the day one species looked at injustice and simply refused to accept it, Kim said when the applause died down. They learn that freedom is not given by others but taken by those brave enough to demand it. They learn that a single word, spoken at the right moment, can change the course of history. As Kim finished his speech and returned to his seat, President Park stood to address the assembly. She was older now, her hair gray from the stress of building a new galactic order, but her eyes still burned with the same fire that had led humanity to war. "My fellow citizens of the galaxy," she said, "we have accomplished something our ancestors thought impossible. We have built a civilization based on cooperation rather than domination, on equality rather than hierarchy, on freedom rather than fear." She looked around the great hall, meeting the eyes of beings from every corner of known space. "But our work is not finished. Every day we must choose to preserve what we have built. Every day we must remember that freedom requires vigilance, that democracy demands participation, that equality needs constant protection." As the session ended and delegates began filing out to return to their home worlds, Kim remained in his seat thinking about the journey that had brought them all here. It had started with a simple question: should humanity accept slavery or fight for freedom? The answer had been just as simple: no, and that single word had changed everything. The morning of the 30th day arrived with clear skies over Nexus Prime. In the massive halls of the Galactic Council building, representatives from nearly 1,000 different worlds gathered for what they expected to be a routine tribute ceremony. The humans would either arrive with their payment or beg for more time. Overlord Vexithari took his place on the towering judgment seat that dominated the main chamber. The seat was carved from black stone and decorated with symbols of power from across the galaxy. From this height, he could look down on every other representative, reminding them of their place in the galactic order. The chamber was arranged in rings, with the oldest and most powerful species closest to the center. The newer civilizations sat in the outer rings closer to the walls. Today, one seat in the newest ring sat empty, waiting for Earth's representative. "Let the tribute ceremony begin," Vexithari announced, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. Counselor Mordak stepped forward with a datapad in his many hands. "Today we receive tribute from the human civilization of Earth. According to galactic law, they must provide 40% of their industrial output, 30% of their food production, and 200,000 workers. Murmurs filled the chamber as the representatives discussed the tribute in their various languages. Some species remembered their own first tribute ceremonies, when they had begged and pleaded for reduced payments. Others had been paying tribute for so long they barely remembered being free. "Are the humans here?" Vexthari asked, looking around the chamber. "Long-range sensors detect a single human vessel approaching the station," reported the communications officer. "It appears to be a small military ship." Many representatives turned to look at each other with confusion. Tribute ships were usually massive cargo vessels filled with goods and resources. Military ships were for protection or negotiation. A single small warship was unusual. "Perhaps they are here to surrender," suggested Counselor Yildesta, a tall creature with blue skin and large black eyes. "Some species prefer to give up their independence formally rather than simply pay tribute. Or maybe they want to negotiate," added another counselor. "Young species often try to bargain for lower payments." Vexathari smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "It does not matter what they want. The law is the law. They will pay or they will be destroyed." 20 minutes later, the chamber's main doors opened. Captain Daeho Kim walked in alone, wearing his dress uniform with no weapons visible. He moved with calm confidence, his eyes straight ahead, ignoring the hundreds of alien faces staring at him. The walk to the center of the chamber took several minutes. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence as every representative watched this lone human approach the judgment seat. Some had expected to see cargo ships or at least a team of negotiators. Instead, they saw one man walking calmly toward what might be his death. Daeho stopped at the speaking circle directly in front of Vexathari's throne. The Overlord looked down at him with yellow eyes that glowed in the chamber's dim lighting. "Human representative," Vexathari said, his voice booming through speakers placed around the chamber. "You stand before the Galactic Council to answer for your species' tribute obligation. Where are your cargo ships? Where are your workers? Where is your tribute?" The chamber was completely silent now. Even the usual background noise of alien breathing and movement had stopped. Every eye, antenna, and sensor was focused on the small human standing alone in the circle. Daeho looked up at the Overlord without fear. He had practiced this moment in his mind 1,000 times during the journey to Nexus Prime. He knew that his next words would either save humanity or doom them all. "Overlord Vexthari," Daeho said clearly, his voice carrying throughout the chamber. "I am Captain Daeho Kim of the Earth Defense Force. I come here today to give you humanity's official response to your tribute demand." "Then speak," Vexthari commanded. "Tell us what tribute Earth will pay." Daeho took a deep breath. Behind him, he could hear the quiet sounds of alien representatives leaning forward to listen. Some had recording devices ready to capture humanity's surrender. Others expected dramatic speeches or emotional pleas. Instead, Daeho looked directly at Vexthari and spoke one simple word. "No." For a moment, nothing happened. The word seemed to hang in the air like a physical object. Then the chamber exploded into noise as hundreds of alien voices spoke at once. "Did he say no?" asked one representative. "Impossible," said another. "No species refuses tribute." "He must mean they need more time," suggested a third. But Vexathari heard exactly what Daeho had said. The Overlord's yellow eyes grew brighter as anger filled his massive body. His claws gripped the arms of his throne so tightly that the stone began to crack. "What did you say?" he roared, his voice drowning out all other sounds in the chamber. Daeho remained calm. "I said no, Overlord. Earth will not pay tribute. We will not give you our industry. We will not give you our food. And we will never give you our people." The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was the silence of shock, of disbelief, of a moment when everything everyone thought they knew suddenly changed. Some representatives sat with their mouths open. Others whispered prayers in their native languages. A few actually began to applaud before quickly stopping themselves, afraid of what might happen if they showed approval. In the highest ring of seats, reserved for the oldest species, ancient beings who had not moved in decades suddenly stirred. They remembered stories from their youth, legends of species that had once challenged the tribute system. But those were just stories. This was real. Vexathari slowly stood up from his throne. At full height, he was nearly 3 times as tall as Daeho. His shadow fell across the human captain like a dark promise of death. "In 3,000 years, Vexathari said, his voice now quiet but somehow more terrifying than when he shouted, No species has ever refused to pay tribute. The law exists because it maintains order. Order exists because we enforce it with strength. Your law, Deho replied, is not our law. It is the law of this galaxy. We reject your galaxy's law. More gasps and whispers filled the chamber. Some representatives were now openly staring at Deho as if he had grown a second head. Others were looking around nervously, wondering if this defiance might spread to their own species. Counselor Mordak scuttled forward on his many legs, his voice high with panic. Overlord, perhaps we should discuss this privately. The human may not understand the full consequences of his words. But Vexthari raised one clawed hand for silence. His eyes never left Deho's face. Tell me, human, do you understand what you have just done? Do you know what happens to species that defy the Council? Yes, Deho said simply. You send fleets to destroy them. You burn their worlds and enslave their survivors. You make examples of them to frighten others into obedience. And you still refuse? We still refuse. Vexithari's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. Then you have chosen extinction, very well. Admiral Zek Morris is already on his way to your system with 5,000 ships. When he finishes with your world, there will be nothing left but dust and memories. Deho nodded calmly. We expected as much. We are ready. Ready? Vexthari's voice rose again. You have 300 ships against 5,000. You have no allies, no advanced weapons, no hope of victory. What could you possibly be ready for? For the first time since entering the chamber, Deho smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret that would change everything. We are ready to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten humanity, he said. We are ready to prove that freedom is worth fighting for, and we are ready to teach you that some species cannot be enslaved, no matter how strong you think you are. With those words, Deho turned and walked toward the exit. Behind him, the chamber erupted into chaos as representatives argued, shouted, and tried to understand what they had just witnessed. As the human captain reached the doors, Vexithari's voice followed him. You will die for your defiance, human. Your species will be extinct before the next cycle ends. Deho paused at the doorway and looked back one final time. Maybe, he said, but we will die free. The decision came 3 days later. President Hyjin Park stood before the United Earth Assembly, her voice steady as she spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. We will not submit to slavery, she declared. We will not trade our freedom for empty promises of safety. If the Galactic Council wants tribute from Earth, they will have to take it by force. The assembly hall erupted in both cheers and worried voices. Some delegates stood and applauded. Others sat in stunned silence, thinking about what this choice would cost them. But the decision was made. Humanity would fight. Within hours, every military base on Earth was buzzing with activity. Admiral Ji-Hoon Kang stood in the command center of Luna Base, Earth's moon fortress, watching dozens of screens showing ship movements across the solar system. He was a tall man with steady hands and calm eyes that had seen many battles. How many ships can we put together? He asked his aide. 312 combat vessels, sir, came the reply, plus about 50 support ships for supplies and repairs. Admiral Kang nodded grimly. It was a respectable fleet by human standards, but tiny compared to what was coming. Intelligence reports said the Council had over 50,000 ships. The math was simple and terrifying. Quality over quantity, he said to himself, then turned to his communications officer. Get me General Yunju Yu at Mars Command. The holographic display showed a woman in military uniform standing in a red-tinted room. General Yu had spent her career preparing for alien invasion. Now that day had finally come. Admiral, she said with a sharp salute, my ground forces are ready. We have 2 million troops trained and equipped, but if their ships get past yours, numbers won't matter much. I know, Admiral Kang replied. That's why we're not going to fight them the way they expect. How are the special projects coming along? General Yu smiled grimly. Dr. Minho Park says his kinetic weapons will be ready in 2 weeks. Commander Sujin Lee has her boarding teams trained and waiting, and the asteroid belt modifications are nearly complete. The asteroid belt was humanity's secret weapon. For months, teams of engineers had been installing massive railguns inside the larger asteroids. These weapons could fire tungsten rods at incredible speeds. When something moving that fast hit a ship, it would tear through armor like paper through skin. Dr. Minho Park worked day and night in his laboratory deep under the Swiss mountains. His team had discovered how to accelerate small objects to nearly the speed of light. The energy requirements were enormous, but the results were devastating. A piece of metal the size of a coin could destroy a battleship if it was moving fast enough. The main problem is targeting, he explained to his assistant, Dr. Young-Soo Lim. These projectiles move so fast that we have to fire them before the enemy ships are even in sight. We need to predict exactly where they will be. The AI calculations should handle that, Young-Soo replied, pointing to the massive computer systems humming around them. As long as we know their approach vectors, we can hit them. Minho nodded, but his face was still worried. Let's just hope we get enough chances to test this theory. On Mars, Commander Soo-Jin Lee put her elite soldiers through their final training exercises. These were not ordinary troops. Each one had been selected for intelligence, physical ability, and mental toughness. They would be the ones boarding alien ships in the middle of battle. Remember, she told them as they practiced zero-gravity combat in the training chambers, alien ships are designed for their crew, not for us. The corridors might be too narrow or too wide. The gravity might be wrong. The air might be poison. But you are humans. You adapt. You overcome. You win. The soldiers moved through the mock alien ship with practiced efficiency. They had studied every known council ship design and practiced fighting in dozens of different environments. They knew their mission was probably suicide, but none of them complained. While the military prepared for war, Earth's factories worked around the clock to produce weapons, ammunition, and supplies. Every piece of metal that could be spared went into building ships or weapons. Children collected scrap metal for recycling. Farmers grew extra food and preserved it for the coming siege. But not everyone supported the decision to fight. In major cities around the world, protests demanded that the government reconsider. Some people believed humanity should pay the tribute, rather than risk total destruction. Better to live as slaves than die as heroes, shouted one protest leader in New York. But these voices were drowned out by millions of others who refused to accept surrender. Veterans of Earth's wars volunteered to fight again. Young people enlisted in record numbers. Scientists worked to develop new weapons. Even children contributed by growing food in school gardens. Far across the galaxy, the Council's intelligence networks reported these activities to their masters. In his throne room on the capital world, Overlord Vexithari listened to the reports with growing amusement. They are building weapons? He asked, his voice like grinding stones. These humans think they can fight the entire council? His aide, Counselor Mordak, nodded nervously. Mordak was a thin creature with too many arms and worried eyes. The reports say they are mobilizing their entire population, Overlord. They seem to believe they can resist. Vexithari's laughter filled the chamber. It was not a pleasant sound. How entertaining. It has been centuries since anyone tried to fight us. This will make an excellent example for other species who might have similar ideas. Should we send the full fleet, Overlord? Mordak asked. No, Vexithari replied, waving one clawed hand. Send Admiral Zechamoris with 5,000 ships. That should be more than enough to crush these upstart mammals. Make sure to capture their leaders alive. I want other species to see what happens to those who defy the Council. Back on Earth, the final preparations were being made. Captain Daeho Kim stood on the bridge of his upgraded ship, now armed with the new kinetic weapons. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with focused determination. Sir, his navigation officer reported, long-range sensors are picking up movement at the edge of the galaxy. Large fleet formations heading this way. Daeho nodded. He had expected this. Time until they reach our solar system? Approximately 15 days at current speed. Then we have 15 days to finish our preparations, Daeho said calmly. Send word to all ships. Final weapons tests begin immediately. Across the solar system, humanity's small fleet moved into position. The asteroid belt bristled with hidden weapons. Earth's cities prepared for siege, and in the depths of space, alien ships began their journey toward what they thought would be an easy victory. None of them knew that humanity had been preparing for this moment, since the first human looked up at the stars and decided to reach for them. They were about to learn that enslaving the human race would not be as simple as they thought. The greatest war in galactic history was about to begin. The silver walls of the Galactic Council building stretched high into the artificial sky of Nexus Prime. Inside the main communication room, thousands of holographic screens showed messages being sent across the galaxy. Captain Daeho Kim stood, at attention as the massive display in front of him came to life. The face that appeared was not pleasant to look at. Overlord Vexithari had scales like dark metal, and eyes that glowed yellow in the dim light. His voice came through the speakers with a sound like grinding stone. Human representative, the Overlord, began, "Your species has now been part of our galactic community for 50 Earth years. The time has come for you to fulfill your duties." Daeho kept his face calm, but his hands were tight behind his back. He had hoped this day would never come. Every species that joined the galaxy had to pay tribute to older civilizations. It was the law. It had always been the law. The Galactic Council requires the following from your world called Earth. Vexthari continued. You will provide 40% of everything your factories make. You will give us 30% of all food your farmers grow. And you will send us 200,000 of your people to work on our worlds. The numbers hit Daeho like physical blows. 40% of Earth's industry would cripple their economy. 30% of their food would mean hunger for millions. But 200,000 people? That meant slavery. You have 30 standard days to begin shipping these tributes, the Overlord said. His mouth opened in what might have been a smile, showing rows of sharp teeth. Any delay or resistance will be met with the full force of the Council fleet. The screen went dark. Daeho stood alone in the silent room, staring at the black display. Around him, the normal sounds of the space station continued. Alien voices spoke in languages he did not understand. Ships arrived and departed through the massive docking bays. Life went on as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Daeho walked quickly to his ship, the Inchin's Pride. The vessel was small compared to most Council ships, but it was fast and reliable. His crew was waiting for him. They could see from his face that the news was bad. Set course for Earth, he told them. Maximum speed. The journey back to Earth took 3 days. During that time, Daeho sent coded messages ahead, warning the government about what was coming. By the time his ship entered Earth's atmosphere, emergency meetings were already taking place in every major capital. The landing pad at Seoul Spaceport was crowded with government vehicles. Daeho was rushed directly to the underground bunker beneath the Blue House, where President Hai-Jin Park was waiting with her top advisors. The room was tense and quiet. President Park was a small woman, but everyone in the room respected her strength. She had led Earth through its first contact with alien civilizations and had always fought for human dignity. Tell us exactly what they said, she ordered. Daeho repeated the Overlord's demands, word for word. As he spoke, he watched the faces around the table grow more and more shocked. Defense Minister Taemin Lee slammed his hand on the table when Daeho mentioned the 200,000 workers. They want our people as slaves, Lee said angrily. They are asking us to sell our own citizens. It is the way things work in the galaxy, said Foreign Minister Yoon Hee-jo. She was a careful woman who always thought about consequences. Every species pays tribute to those who came before them. We knew this day would come. Knowing it would come and accepting it are two different things, said Chief Science Officer So-Ra Choi. She was younger than most in the room, but her mind was sharp as a laser. We need to look at our options. What options? Asked Economic Advisor Hyun-Woo Kim. They have 50,000 ships, we have 300. They have weapons that can destroy planets. We barely have shields that work properly. The room fell silent as everyone considered the numbers. Earth's military was strong by human standards, but compared to the vast fleets of the Galactic Council, they were like children with toy guns. There might be another way, said a quiet voice from the corner of the room. Everyone turned to look at Woo Jin Nam. He was the head of Earth's First Contact Division, and had spent more time dealing with aliens than anyone else alive. His hair was gray and his face was lined with worry, but his eyes were still sharp. What do you mean? President Park asked. In all my years of studying galactic history, Woo Jin said slowly, I have learned that the tribute system works because no one has ever challenged it. Every species accepts it as natural law. But what if someone said no? They would be destroyed, Minister Lee said immediately. Maybe, Woo Jin agreed. Or maybe the system is not as strong as it appears. Think about it. If the Council has to use force to collect tribute, It means they are not collecting it willingly. If they are not collecting it willingly, it means other species also hate this system. President Park leaned forward in her chair. Are you suggesting we refuse to pay? I am suggesting we consider all possibilities, Wu Jin replied. We could pay the tribute and watch our people suffer. We could try to negotiate for smaller amounts. Or we could stand up and say this is wrong. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some advisors argued that resistance would mean the destruction of Earth. Others said that slavery was worse than death. The room grew heated as voices rose and tempers flared. Finally, President Park stood up. The room became quiet immediately. We will not make this decision tonight, she said. But I want everyone to understand something. Humanity did not climb out of caves and reach for the stars just to become servants to aliens. We have faced extinction before. We have survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that should have destroyed us. Each time we found a way to keep going. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. If we decide to resist, many of us will die. Our cities might burn. Our children might never see the stars again. But if we submit, we will lose something worse than our lives. We will lose what makes us human. The meeting ended without a decision. As the advisors filed out, Dae-ho remained behind. President Park sat down heavily in her chair, suddenly looking very tired. What do you think, Captain? She asked. Dae-ho considered his words carefully. I think about my daughter, Madam President. She is only 8 years old. When she grows up, do I want her to live in a world where humans bow to aliens? Or do I want her to live free, even if that freedom comes with danger? President Park nodded slowly. Get some rest, Captain. Tomorrow we begin planning for the most important decision in human history. As Dae-ho left the bunker and walked into the Soul Night, he looked up at the stars. Somewhere up there, alien civilizations waited for Earth's answer. They expected either submission or negotiation. They had no idea that humanity was considering a third option, the option that would change everything. Admiral Zekamora stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the stars streak past as his fleet moved toward the human solar system. He was a veteran commander who had crushed a dozen rebellions in his long career. This assignment was supposed to be simple. How long until we reach their system? He asked his navigation officer. 6 hours at current speed, Admiral, came the reply. Zekamora nodded and turned to study the tactical display. 5,000 ships of various sizes moved in perfect formation behind him. Battleships that could destroy continents. Cruisers armed with weapons that could melt steel from orbit. Carrier ships filled with fighter craft. It was more firepower than most species had ever seen in one place. What do our scouts report about human defenses? He asked. Minimal resistance expected, sir, his intelligence officer replied. 300 small ships, mostly concentrated around their homeworld. Their weapons are primitive chemical rockets and basic energy beams. Our shield should stop anything they can throw at us. And their ground forces? Approximately 2 million soldiers using projectile weapons. No match for our plasma guns and battle armor. Zekamora smiled coldly. This would be over quickly. The humans would see his fleet and surrender immediately, just like every other species had done. Their brief moment of defiance would become a lesson for the entire galaxy. But as his fleet approached the edge of the solar system, strange readings began appearing on the sensors. Admiral, his scanning officer called out. I'm detecting unusual energy signatures in the asteroid belt. What kind of signatures? Unknown, sir. The asteroids appear to have been modified somehow. Before Zekamora could respond, space around his fleet suddenly filled with streaks of light. Tungsten rods the size of telephone poles, accelerated to incredible speeds, tore through his formation like invisible spears. The first ship hit was a destroyer on the fleet's outer edge. The tungsten rod punched through its shields as if they were paper, through its armor as if it were cloth, and out the other side in a shower of metal and flame. The ship broke in half and exploded. Evasive action! Zekamora shouted, but it was too late. More rods struck home. A cruiser lost its entire forward section. A battleship's main reactor exploded when a rod pierced its containment field. Fighter craft were simply vaporized when the projectiles passed through them. In the space of 30 seconds, Zekamora lost over 200 ships. Where are those shots coming from? he demanded. "The asteroid belt, sir. The rocks themselves are firing at us." On Earth, Admiral Ji-Hoon Kang watched the battle unfold from his command center. The kinetic weapons were performing even better than expected. Each hit was devastating, and the alien ship seemed completely unprepared for this type of attack. "Phase 2, he ordered calmly. Across the solar system, human ships that had been hiding behind moons and planets suddenly activated their engines. They were smaller than the alien vessels, but much faster. They darted between the larger council ships like wolves attacking a herd of buffalo. Captain Yan-Su Han commanded one of these attack squadrons. Her ship, the Soul Strike, was one of the new stealth vessels designed specifically for this battle. It was fast, hard to detect, and armed with the most advanced weapons humanity had ever built. "Target their command ship," she told her weapons officer. "We need to disrupt their communications." "Locked on, Captain. Fire." The Soul Strike's main gun was a focused particle beam that could cut through most known materials. The beam struck the side of a council command vessel and carved a deep groove in its hull. Atmosphere and debris poured out of the wound, but the humans were not content to simply shoot from a distance. As the battle raged, boarding pods launched from hidden positions throughout the solar system. These small craft were designed for one purpose: to get human soldiers inside alien ships. Commander Sujin Lee led the first boarding assault. Her pod slammed into the hull of a council battleship and immediately began cutting through the armor with plasma torches. Within minutes, she and her team were inside the alien vessel. The interior of the ship was like nothing they had trained for. The corridors were too wide, designed for creatures much larger than humans. The gravity was wrong, making every step feel strange. The air was thick and smelled of sulfur. "Remember your training," Lee told her soldiers through their helmet radios. "Find their reactor room and plant the charges." The team moved through the ship with practiced efficiency. They had studied alien ship designs for months and knew exactly where to go. The alien crew they encountered were not prepared for close-quarters combat with humans. Most had never seen a human before and were shocked by their speed and aggression. Tech specialist Kyung-min Choi worked quickly to hack into the ship's computer systems while demolitions expert Jae-sung Park planted explosives in critical locations. Within 20 minutes, they had completely disabled the battleship and were ready to move to their next target. Similar boarding actions were taking place across the battlefield. Human soldiers were inside dozens of council ships, causing chaos and destruction from within. The aliens had expected a traditional space battle, not this kind of close-quarters warfare. But the real surprise came when other alien species began joining the fight. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Zach Morris received a message that made his blood run cold. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving attack signals from Kepler Collective ships. They're firing on our vessels." "That's impossible," Zach Morris replied. "The Kepler Collective pays tribute. They're part of the Council." "Not anymore, sir. We're also detecting new Centauri Republic ships moving to attack positions, and the Vegan Trade Federation has just declared their support for the humans." Zach Morris stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Green dots representing friendly forces were rapidly turning red as species after species joined the human rebellion. These were civilizations that had paid tribute for centuries. "They should have been cowering in fear, not attacking council ships. How is this possible?" he whispered. The answer came in a transmission from the human Admiral Kang. "Admiral Zach Morris," the human voice said calmly, "you are outnumbered and outgunned. We offer you one chance to surrender and withdraw from our system." "Never," Zach Morris roared back. "The Council does not surrender to inferior species." "Then you have chosen poorly," Kang replied. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships moved with impossible speed and coordination. Their kinetic weapons continued to tear through Council formations. Boarding parties captured ship after ship from the inside, and everywhere, species that had been slaves for generations suddenly remembered what it felt like to fight for their freedom. The tide turned when Captain Dae-ho Kim, now commanding a battle squadron, managed to corner Zach Morris himself. The Eternal Dominion was damaged and alone, cut off from the rest of the Council fleet. "This is Captain Kim of the Earth Defense Force," he transmitted to the alien flagship. "Your fleet is defeated. Your allies have abandoned you. Surrender now and we will allow you to return home." Zach Morris looked around his damaged bridge. Half his crew was dead or wounded. His mighty fleet was scattered and broken. Species he had conquered were now hunting his ships like prey. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Zek Morris admitted defeat. We surrender," he said quietly. The transmission went out across the galaxy. The impossible had happened. The humans had won, but this was only the beginning. As news of the victory spread, more and more species began to refuse tribute payments. The galaxy was awakening from 3,000 years of slavery, and nothing would ever be the same again.